We're in Hebrews chapter 12, and we're technically we're going to start in verse 12, but I'm going to read some from some of the previous verses just so we have some context for where we're moving into. Last week we were looking at the chastisement of the Lord and this passage, and we're trying to look at it in context with what was going on with faith and all of these things, which made it very interesting. At least I found that whole passage interesting, how we were looking at the chastisement of God might not necessarily be from sin, just it might be just so that we can develop and we can grow, because that's his desire for us. And then I get to verse 12, and I have to be honest with you. I read verse 12, this passage here of 12 through what is it, 17, so many times, and I'm the first, I don't know how many times I read it. I'm like, I don't understand what the point is that you're trying to make here, which meant that I started to really dig into it, and then I probably went too far. So I'm just warning you right now. I may have gone a little too far on how much there is here because there's some really cool stuff. So it maybe we'll get in here and I'll be excited, and you guys are like, John, what are you even talking about? I'm just warning you. There might be a little bit of that. We'll see how that goes.
John, what are you talking about?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. All right. So let's start. We're gonna read. I'll read verses 17 through 13. So we're just gonna read 17 or verse 7 through 13, just to remind us where we read last week. It says, "If you endure chastising, God deals with you as with sons. For what son is there whom a father does not chasten? But if you are without chastising, of which of all have become partakers, then you are illegitimate and not sons. Furthermore, we have had human fathers who correct us, and we paid them respect. Shall we not much more readily be in subjugation to the Father of spirits and live? For they indeed for a few days chastened us as seemed best to them, but he for our profit, that we may be partakers of his holiness. Now no chastising seems to be joyful for the present, but painful. Nevertheless, always it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. Therefore, uh therefore, strengthen the hands which hang down and the feeble knees, and make straight paths for your feet, so that what is lame may not be dislocated, but rather be healed. So here's where we are. We're reading verses 12 and 13, and he talks about strengthening hands which hang down, and feeble knees. And I actually read this in multiple versions, and I actually only found one version, one translation where it says strengthen your hands and your knees. But every other translation, it doesn't actually say that. It says strengthen the hands which hang down and the feeble knees. And I'm just bringing this up because as I read it, my first thought is I'm not sure, is this passage telling us to strengthen our own hands, or is it telling us to strengthen other hands, the ones that are weak? And I'm not, as I've read through this multiple times, I'm still not sure. It could be both. It could be it's telling us to strengthen our own selves. It could be to strengthen others. I'm leaning towards both just because, as I mentioned, I don't see a pronoun in there until verse 13. And so it wasn't clear. It's not clear to me if this is something we're supposed to do for ourselves or we're supposed to do for others. Again, I think both. But as we get through here, we'll stop again and look at this again. I just want you guys to think about this as we're going through this. Do you think the author is talking about ourselves? Doing this for ourselves, or are we supposed to be encouraging others and doing it for others? Or maybe it's a combination of the both. Um, we'll have to get through and see what you guys think. So the first thing that we see here is he says, "Strengthen the hands which hang down, and the feet and feeble knees." And so let's take this first part about strengthen the hands. So just so we have the context, what he was saying is we saw earlier there was chapter 11, there's all these uh, examples of faith, and then we saw as we moved into chapter 12 there is how we should take those examples of faith and how Jesus is the better example of faith. But even as we progress through there, we see as we look through the chastening and everything, there's this idea of uh, that we're gonna experience some hard, difficult times. And part of that is because God loves us and He wants us to trust Him and He wants to strengthen that so that we know we can trust Him. And so we're gonna have some of these times that are gonna be difficult. And then the author, again, I don't know if it's a he, the author jumps into verse 12 and says, therefore, strengthen the hands which hang down. And so there's this idea here of, you know what? Sometimes you're just going to have to suck it up and you're going to have to work hard. And that's the idea that I'm getting from this passage right here is the author saying sometimes it's going to be hard and you can't stop. You just can't. And we'll look. He's actually got multiple examples of this with the hands and the knees and the feet. But there's this idea here that sometimes things are going to get hard and you're going to want to stop because it's hard, but don't stop. Strengthen those hands. When your hands are hanging down because you're just so tired, then you've got to strengthen them and you've got to exercise them and develop them so that you can keep going. And this is one of those hard things of sometimes you have to keep moving even when it's hard to keep moving. And so that's this idea here that we're seeing in this passage is this idea of endurance, of being tough. This might be a good men's conference type of passage where it is sometimes you just got to man up and do the stuff that that you have to do. And so that's the gist of this what we're going to read through as we go through the verse 12 and verse 13. But there's some practical things here that are pretty good. And I also want to point out that this doesn't mean that you can't have a vacation. It doesn't mean you can't take a break. It doesn't mean any of that stuff. But it does mean that there are going to be times where things are going to be hard. You're going to be burnt out. You're going to be tired and you're going to want to stop. And the author here is encouraging you, don't stop. Don't stop following Jesus just because things are hard. Strengthen your hands, strengthen your knees, walk this path, keep going. And that's the idea here. There are going to be times when it's not time to take a break and you're going to want to take a break. Don't take that break. And there's a good reason for that. And we're going to get to that reason in verse 13. But right now, that's where we're at. So the first part here is strengthen the hands which hang down. And I like this idea here because it's the emphasis that the hands they need the strength. And I'm just bringing this up because a lot of times when we're doing things, it's our hands that are actually doing the things, right? We might be thinking of what we want to do, but the work is being accomplished with our hands. Just imagine all of the things that you do every day, all day, if you couldn't use your hands because your hands were just so tired that you couldn't do it. I mean, you couldn't get anything done. And so that's what's going on here is this idea of getting the work done. Your hands are so tired, they're hanging down, you just can't lift them up, you can't do anything. And the author is saying, strengthen those hands. So this idea here would be like whatever ministry you're involved in, there are these days where you're just tired out and you don't want to do this ministry anymore, and the author is saying, keep going, keep doing it, strengthen those hands. And again, this is where I wonder if this is about me strengthening me or if this is about encouraging someone else who may be tired and needs some help strengthening them, and maybe it's both. But I like this idea here of lifting up these hands and keep going, even when it's not, which often means sometimes we aren't supposed to focus on how tired we are, because sometimes, right, there's lots of times in life where you're tired, and that's the main focus of what's going on. I'm just tired, and I think the switch here is stop focusing on the tiredness or the burnt outness or just how tough things are, and get back to work and start doing things. Good morning, Rich. We're in Hebrews 12, verse 12. So I just want to give one example of this. When I was younger, I used to do a lot of running, and I think I've mentioned this before. And I like to do long distances. And here's the thing that I discovered about running long distances. You can go so far, and then your body says, all right, I'm done. We need to stop now. And you can listen to that, or you can ignore it with your mind and say, nope, I'm just going to keep going. And you keep going, right? So there's this aspect of your body's tired and says, I need to stop. And your mind says, nope. It could say, okay, we're going to stop, but it could also say, nope, we're not going to stop. We're going to keep going. And that's the concept that's going on here, which is there are times where our flesh says, I just need to take the easy way. I just need to stop. And what this author is encouraging us is there are times when our flesh tells us to stop, but we should not stop. We need to keep moving. We need to keep going. And the example here is the hands. We need to keep working even when things are tough. How do you guys think we can do this? How can we continue on working when things are hard? How can we encourage someone else to continue working when it's hard? Do you have any
Uh,
practical advice for this? Go ahead, John.
Absolutely. I was talking to my students yesterday, my strength conditioning class about mental toughness, and the Navy SEALs have a 40-60% rule where when your mind tells you that you're tired, you've still got 60% left in the tank. And so you got to just push past that and really dig deep in that well and persevere in spite of that fatigue. And I try to apply that all the time, or just think about what my father would think if he was watching me and I quit. And so just to persevere in spite of the fatigue, and tired can never be an excuse.
I like it.
I take this as like you said, I think that this 12 is both. And I think that is because especially today, but a lot of people deal with depression and they need someone to come alongside and say, hey, how's it going? I remember in Livermore at the church when we were on L Street, one guy came up to me one Sunday and just said, hey, how you doing? And my wife and I had just had a fight, and I was kind of discouraged. And he just kept asking me, no, how are you doing? And that lifted my spirits because someone cared. And I think that's what, if people know, like John just said, I look at it, if my dad was watching me, what would I do?
Yeah.
And it's just, we need someone to encourage us. And that's where we as men should be looking out for someone. If you've ever seen somebody with their shoulders stooped and they're just head hanging down, their hands are at their side, it's like, that they're dealing with something. You need to come alongside and, put your hand on them and say, hey, how can I pray for you? How can I help? What can I do to, you know, cheer you up or something, tell a joke, I don't know. But I just think that this is for both you and someone else. We all need someone to encourage us, and we also need to be an encourager to somebody.
Yeah.
I think I'm sorry, did I interrupt somebody? So one thing I think is interesting is to look at faith, but also to look at motivation. And because I think they both play a role in terms of why somebody would continue past certain things that are difficult. In raising kids, we always get down to, what do you really believe this is doing, things like that. And when they get a sense of, all right, what do I really believe about this activity that I'm doing? That focuses on things a little bit, helps people focus on things and understand and really challenge your own faith about, do you have reason behind what you're doing? And is that reason, good enough to continue past the difficulties? But the other thing I think is really interesting also that I've learned is motivation, because everybody's motivated differently. I mean, the Marine thing is very true, but not everybody can become a Marine, nor are they willing to push past that 40-60, but they might be motivated a different way. Like you said, because what if my dad is watching over me? And that's I mean, to some people those are the same things, but to the others, they're very, very different things as to how you get motivated, why you do what you do. And an awareness of not only yourself, but also others. And we don't have, you know, those of us that have raised kids understand that very quickly. That what motivates one kid doesn't necessarily motivate the other, even though you go like,
Yeah.
you don't want to say what is wrong with you, but in a sense, it's like,
Yeah.
why can one kid push past this and the other one cannot? And it's not because they cannot, they just have very different motivations of how to push themselves over the edge. And I think that's interesting to consider when we're trying to encourage other people, because some need a swift kick in the behind, the others need a soft whisper to encourage them. I think it's a little different. It can be a little
Yeah.
different, at least in my experience.
That's good, and it's also interesting to see that the author doesn't give a specific, this is how you do it. It's a recognition that it might be different for each of us, and it might be different in different circumstances where we need a different type of motivation. I like that motivation word. Um, yeah, that's good. All right. Let's look at the rest of this. So verse 12, it says, therefore strengthen the hands which hang down and the feeble knees. So we're supposed to strengthen the hands and we're supposed to strengthen the knees. Now the hands are those things which, as I mentioned before, that's the working side of things. That's the doing the things. But then when it's talking about knees, this is talking about our movement and our ability to keep moving forward and to move where we need to go. So there are going to be times where you're just like, I'm tired of moving. I'm tired of following, Lord. I need a break. I need to sit down right here and just take a break. And again, the idea here is no, you have to still keep following. You have to still keep walking. So we want to strengthen those knees because we have to motivate. I'm taking Rich's word here. We want to help motivate someone to keep continually following Jesus, or even ourselves. Sometimes we have to motivate ourselves. It's easy to stop and not move, right? It's easy to go to rest. But once you get moving, this is a cool thing about inertia too, which is once you get moving, it's a lot less work to keep moving than it is to stop. So there's this great thing where we have to remind and encourage people, keep moving, because if you stop, then it's going to be a lot harder to get started again. So you got to keep going. I was mentioning about running and everything, and John mentioned that 40-60 rule, and I'm just thinking back, there's only been a couple of times in a race where I actually finished the race and I had nothing left. And I remember one of those times I ran and I finished the race and I stumbled past the line because I'm just like, I'm done. I don't have anything left. And I sat down on the ground, and immediately when I sat down on the ground, all the muscles in my legs cramped up and I could no longer move. I was just stuck. I'm like, I literally can't get up. I'm in a little bit of pain because they're all cramping up, but at the same time, I can't move. I'm stuck. I suspect if I didn't stumble onto the ground and lay down, or if I had just kept moving a little bit, maybe my legs wouldn't have cramped up. But again, I was out of energy. But the point here is this: is we got to keep moving, because if we stop, it can be really hard to get started again. And there's a danger in that, and there's a recognition of the danger in that. So the author's pointing out, strengthen those people with the feeble knees when they are just barely hobbling along and it looks like they're about to stop. Or even ourselves, if it looks like we're about to stop, we need to encourage, we need to strengthen. And again, there's a side of you just got to toughen up and you just got to keep moving forward. But also at the same time, there's the side of we want to encourage other people as well. Anybody have any thoughts?
I just think about every time I've moved something heavy and a cat or somebody has come by and stopped my momentum. And or even when you're running and you get your breathing pattern going and then you say hi and it will just mess you up a little bit. And so I think especially when we got momentum moving for Christ, that's when the devil tries to really stumble you or throw an obstacle in your path.
Yeah.
And that's when it's even more important to remain vigilant and disciplined and keep pushing in spite of temptation and everything else the evil one will try to put in our way.
And we're thinking of physical work, but it doesn't have to be just physical work, right? Because even when my work, I'm a software engineer. If somebody interrupts me, then they've stopped my momentum. They've stopped the way I'm thinking, and I'll address what they're talking about, and then I'll get back to them like, oh man, I just got to start all over. So it's not just a physical thing. We emotionally sometimes, if we get stopped, we have to start over. If we mentally, if we get stopped, we'll have to start over. So this applies spiritually as well. If we get
Everything.
stopped, then we have to start over. So we want to keep making progress towards following Jesus. Bill, I think you were going to say
I
something. I
think the
apologize.
helping others is, you know, more than encouraging, leading by example is also a way to help others, especially your children or the young Christians. If you're leading by example, they learn from that, and that helps them. How you deal with a certain situation or a certain problem, they can learn from your example that you're turning to God, and that's how you deal with the problem, and they'll learn from that.
Yeah, no, that's good.
Also, I want to not discourage people. You know, we can go too far also. We can push ourselves so far that it does damage to us or whatever. I remember in training, I was in school for electronics in the service. And one of the instructors told me, if something is really hard and you just can't figure it out, sometimes you need to just go take a break and rest your mind a second or two. Then you have to go back to it. I'm not saying don't go back to it, but sometimes you need to understand that you need to take a rest and not push yourself so hard that it hurts or it could cause physical damage.
Sure.
You have to find that balance. And I think that's what the author's saying is keep your path straight, your feet straight. In other words, you're still on the same focus, but you just need to sometimes take a break. And so yes, you need to push through, but you always need to come back to that problem. But I want to encourage people to also, hey, it is time let's take a vacation. We have the time, let's do this or that, and help people in that way.
And it's worth pointing out that again, God provides opportunities for us to rest, right? It's not like he doesn't want us to rest. He doesn't want us to stop working or stop moving. He does want us to take breaks. He does want us to be refilled and recharged. But it's the idea here is it's in his time that we do it. And sometimes things get tough. And the natural response is to stop when it gets tough. And the author is saying, when it's tough, that doesn't mean it's time to stop. You should keep going. That doesn't mean you shouldn't take breaks. It doesn't mean you shouldn't stop. But at the same time, just because it's tough doesn't mean it's time to stop. It's good.
Yeah, there's a difference between the word stop and there's a difference between the word pause or take
That's
a
true.
break.
Yeah.
I think it's more like there's a difference between the word quit and stop.
But the only danger is if your stop turns into a quit, right? I've stopped, and then it kind of keeps stopping, and then it turns into the quit. So that's the only danger. But you're right. So this next verse, I think, verse 13, is really interesting within this whole context. So let's read 13. It says, "And make straight paths for your feet, so that what is lame may not be dislocated, but rather be healed." So there's a couple of aspects here, but notice first of all it says make straight paths for your feet. Now here's the first time that the author's bringing in this pronoun of your feet. Like I mentioned earlier, it doesn't say that about the feeble hands or the feeble knees, or I'm sorry, the hands that hang down or the feeble knees. It doesn't qualify if it's you or if it's somebody else, but here it is qualifying it by saying make straight paths for your feet. And what the author is pointing out here is, and this is pretty cool, we need to make ruts in our lives. And that might sound a little weird, the way I'm saying it, right? But that's what the author is saying is make paths straight, make ruts in your lives. And that idea here is you need to make habits in your lives. You need to have good habits in your lives so that when things are tough, actually what you do is you're just going to keep going in that path, in that direction, because that's just what you're used to doing. So that's what you do. That makes it easier to continue going and following Jesus. You don't want to make a rut of going off the path and going towards your own desires. You want to make a habit of following him. What do you think about this idea of making paths, of making habits? What are some habits that we can do in our lives that are good habits that will encourage us to keep moving forward even when things are hard?
Pray and read the word.
Okay.
Daily,
Those are pretty good ones.
yeah, daily.
Daily? Okay. It's definitely, if you do it daily, then it's a habit, right? If you do it, here and there, it might not be a habit, and you're still doing it, but it's not a habit. And that's the idea here. It needs to be a habit.
That's like this group of men that we get together every week. It's a good habit because the days that I do miss it, it's like, oh man, I missed that day, and and I really appreciate all you guys,
Yeah.
that's an encouragement. And I think that helps us with staying focused and in that rut.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, definitely keeps us on the path.
Yeah, and I think that's the fellowship part, right? I mean, we as we talk about the word and prayer, but the fellowship part is just as important. I mean, we're laying out Acts chapter 2 here, but then you add communion, we got a church. So but the fellowship part is really important because Christian friends are the only ones that can really do this for you. Like your unbelieving friends cannot. They can do some things for you, motivate you to a workout. But as far as spiritual progress is concerned, unless you've got friends that come alongside, I mean, we're about to read the next verse, right? I mean, pursue holiness. I'm thinking of Timothy when
Peace. Yeah.
call upon the pursue with those who call upon the Lord out of a pure heart. And I think that's really important because without those things, we certainly, when we fall, there's no one there to kind of encourage you when you're discouraged, when you need strength. I think, and the non-Christians can't do that. So it's important to have this constantly and devote yourself to have these conversations and these relationships that are necessary, I think, for every Christian to kind of keep us, on the right path, if you will.
I think non-Christians will try to help you through it, but their way of helping might be a little destructive. Hey, let's go to the
Pull you away, yeah.
Couple things came to mind when I heard this verse, and when John, you were talking about being in that path. Proverbs 3:5-6, trust in the Lord with all your heart, right? Make your path straight. But then also I thought of Autotopia, the little car ride at Disneyland that had that track that no matter how hard you yanked the wheel left or right, you couldn't
Keep going straight.
Right. It always kept you going straight. And then it just jumped into my head, man. I couldn't stop thinking about it.
In my Bible, there's a little footnote, make level path for your feet. There's a little footnote. It's Proverbs 4:26. It says, ponder the path of your feet, then all your ways will be sure. And ponder is basically what my parents used to say, think before you act. And if you're thinking about God or what would Jesus do, that will keep you on a straight path and also help others to do the same.
Yeah. And I think this whole concept of making good habits of doing things, I think sometimes we underestimate how powerful these good habits are. And a common example is even just for me for preparing for this study, and I'm sure all of you have similar experiences where there's this energy level that you have to get past to get started, right? You're like, oh man, that's work. It's gonna be hard. you know, I know I need to do it, but do I really want to do it? Maybe I'll do something else right now. But then you get over that hump and you actually get started and you're like, what was I thinking? Of course I wanted to do this. This was amazing. This was great. And even this Bible study and the conversations we have, you know, we have to wake up at 6 or 6:30 or whatever time you guys wake up to get here. Sometimes that's hard, but at the same time, we have some of these conversations and then you're just energized because somebody said something, you're like, "Oh man, I wasn't even thinking about that and the Lord just spoke to me and I, you know, why would I not want to be here type of thing, right? When you're here, you're just like, why would I not want to be here? But at the same time, getting here sometimes be tough. But it's the habit that breaks over that energy activation, I think is what it's called with habits, that there's a level of energy that you have to expend to get started. But then once you get past that, then it's a lot easier to get going. And so the habits help us. They actually reduce the amount of energy that we have to do in order to start. And so that's one of these great things, and it's a great insight, and I love the fact that the author of Hebrews is bringing this up. Make straight paths for your feet. And again, the idea here isn't that we're supposed to be like the Lord and we're going to make everything great. We're not making these paths so that they're great. It's that we're going to develop a habit where we're making our own habits where we're going to keep going in this direction.
And habits, they build the discipline. And I forget where I heard this, but people don't rise to the occasion, they sink to the level of their training. And that's why you got to train yourself up, because when it hits the fan and you panic, right? You do what's automatic. Where do I go when
Yeah.
things go wrong? I go to the Lord. I ask the Lord. I go to the Word. I call my Christian brother, right? My spiritual brothers. That's what I do.
Yeah.
And a habit kind of develops a reflex that,
Right.
it's automatic that when this happens, you just do this. And if you do it over and over again, you don't even have to think about it anymore. It is just what you do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the past, and if you do any backpacking, climbing up mountains, there's a straight path, but it's not straight up that mountain. It's usually switchbacks. And if you stay on those switchbacks, you will eventually get to the mountaintop. You will make it to the top. If you leave those switchbacks and you try to climb straight up that mountain, you're going to expend more energy and you're going to do more damage to the ground and the area around you. So those paths were made for a reason. Those paths were set there so that you could reach the top of the mountain. That was your goal, to reach the top of the mountain. And in the Bible, we have paths. And these paths are put there for a reason. We have examples, we have followers, we have those that went before us, and we can follow their footsteps, we can follow their paths. If we strike out on our own and we try to climb straight up that hill, usually you don't make it.
How much damage has been done by trying to take a shortcut
Oh, yeah.
in any part of life? Taking shortcut, where does it lead to?
She did.
Yeah.
I knew a case where this group was backpacking and they were hiking up the hill, and two of them decided that they weren't going to stay on the path. They were going to go straight up the hill. They wound up on a cliff and had to be rescued by rescue service because there was no way down. Had they stayed on the path, it would have never happened.
So this brings us to the next point in this verse, which is interesting. And it says, so verse 13, it says, and make straight paths for your feet, so that what is lame may not be dislocated, but rather be healed. And so again, here is the same idea that the author is developing. We've been talking about how when our hands are hanging down, they need to be strengthened. When our knees are feeble, they need to be strengthened. Here's the same idea, which is if you get in this habit, it's easier to follow the habit than to not follow the habit. And that's the idea the author's pointing here is if you develop these good habits, there's going to be times where you're going to be sore, you're going to be beaten up, you're going to be needing healing. And if you get off the path, what you actually could do is damage yourself more. That's what it's saying, right? So that you don't dislocate something, so that you don't make things even worse for yourself. You continue on this path so that you can heal. And that's the idea. We continue on this path so that we can get better, so that we can get stronger. And so that's the interesting point, because the danger here is that we get off the path and we stop following Jesus. We stop putting our trust in our Father. And that's a real danger, right? That could be a real problem. It could do real permanent damage if you decide that you're not going to follow your Jesus, if you're not going to put your trust in him. That could actually teach you a habit of not trusting in him. And you can end up in this other way, in this other direction. And so there's the encouragement here to make your own habits. And again, what I like about this verse, which is different than verse 12, is this is about ourselves. You can't make a habit for somebody else, right? You can encourage them to come alongside you and develop a habit together, but you can't make a habit for them. You can encourage someone and strengthen their hands. You can encourage someone and strengthen their knees, but you can't make their path straight. They have to make their own path straight. And so that's the idea here is we need to do this so that we don't end up in this dangerous position where we dislocate something. And dislocating is really weird. It is interesting how the body works. I don't know if any of you have experienced this. My wife, oh, John has, okay. My wife just last week, I think it was, she dislocated a toe. She dropped something on her foot and her toe came off, dislocated, and she's like, I think I broke it. I don't, but I can move it. I'm not sure what's going on. And so throughout the day, she's like, I think I'm gonna have to go to the hospital. And then I think she tripped and she ended up popping her toe back into place. And she's like, oh, everything's fine now. Everything's good. It all works great now. And so there's this idea here that there's a danger where it can feel like everything is broken and it's just not working because it's not working right. It's not correct. You haven't healed. And the best way to heal is to have these habits that promote healing instead of to just wander off into other places.
I think that's a good analogy, though. It has to be in alignment to work properly.
Right.
So
Yeah.
we have to be in alignment with God for us to work properly. And the dislocated word is a good word to use for that. So if we're not in alignment, then it doesn't work properly.
It encourages me that when I do get off the path, when I do move away from what I should be doing, that this verse tells me, get back on the path,
Yeah.
and then you'll be healed. In other words, getting back on the path gives you the ability to help yourself, get yourself back in alignment. I like what Dan was saying about, the climbers. They had to be rescued so that they could get back on the path. And that's, they probably learned a lesson from that, okay, maybe we should just take the regular path and be like everybody else in doing the right thing instead of doing the wrong thing.
Before we move to verse 14, I just want to circle back to this idea of, is the author talking about personally, or if they're talking about corporately, how we're supposed to be doing this with other people, if we're supposed to be strengthening the hands that hang down on others or ourselves. And I think there's an important aspect here. Definitely, I'm tending to believe that there's both here, that we're supposed to help other people. We're supposed to look and recognize. And I'll be honest, I love it when others do this with me, right? When they're like, hey, let me pray with you. Hey, let me encourage you. I love that. And I'm sure you guys enjoy that and appreciate that as well. So encouraging others and helping them strengthen to push on and keep going is great. But when the reality comes down to it, we have the responsibility for ourselves. We're the ones who have to account for ourselves. And so there's also the internal aspect of this, which is we have to do this within ourselves. We have to sometimes we have to realize we have to do the hard thing, we have to do the tough thing and keep moving even when we don't necessarily want to. And there's an
So
aspect of here. Oh, go ahead, Eric.
no, I don't want to interrupt. Sorry.
No, no, I was going to move on, but go.
No,
So go ahead.
all right. Well, a couple things. One, yeah, I had to nerd on the Latin here. Don't know Greek yet, but it's ambiguous, and I think it's intentional. And sometimes we
Right.
often talk where we switch from ourselves to both of us or all of us, and I think that's the nature of the sentences that are here. There are no articles or
Right.
thes, unless they're very deliberate, and there's none of that here. That say the or such sort of a. So I think your nail's on. From standpoint of this, I'm sitting here wondering and listening and hearing. I love what I've heard. It's just been beautiful, guys. The interesting thing is it almost reflects on religious aspects and doing religious things in a negative connotation that we might take with that. But no, consider the audience he has here. These are Jews who had the gift of the law, the privilege of the law, which was teaching. And what is teaching to a human being in God's eyes? We have to hear something or do something over and over again.
Mm.
And as I'm sure that folks like John would also add, that how many times does it take to fail to get it right? Right?
Yeah.
10,000 hours to become an expert in anything. And it all just makes sense. And there is beauty in this passage. So I love it.
Mhm.
At first I'm sitting there thinking, well, I failed at discipline. I failed at discipline this week physically, and I failed at the rebellion and trying to take different paths. So it's been really good stuff.
Mm.
I've come full circle listening to you guys and just saying that, no, this is a beautiful little passage that really
Yeah.
hits how God is, I think, telling us to stay straight, both corporately and individually.
I I want to point out one more thing about and this is kind of different than what we've been talking about here. But one other aspect of how we talked about how it doesn't really say you do it for yourselves, but you do it with others or you do it for others. But there's an aspect here that we might miss, which is accountability. And accountability is another tool that we have that we can do to make it so that we can continue on these things that are hard. And so that's we don't want to miss that aspect of it either. If we're talking corporately, then there's a sense of accountability. And I know there's a study that says that, if you want to lose weight and you want to start working out and going to the gym, if you do it with a friend, you're more likely to continue doing it than if you do it by yourself, because there's this aspect of accountability with each other. And so the same thing applies here, where if you are off following the Lord and you're doing it all on your own and you don't have that accountability, it's actually harder for you than if you do have some people who are going alongside with you and we're following the Lord together, and we can encourage each other, and there's this aspect of accountability. John mentioned much earlier how, if he thinks about his father was right there watching him. That's kind of, in a sense, this idea of accountability, that his father's there with him, right? And if we do this with each other and think of, oh man, if would I make the same decision if Tim was here next to me? I don't know. Maybe I probably should consider that. So so there's this idea of accountability that we need to consider also in all of this, which is uh it's harder to do things alone. And so this is something for me that I need to consider, and I'm assuming some of you need to consider, is we probably should start asking people more often to be involved in different parts of our lives so that we can do it together, because it probably would be easier if we did that. I don't know what you guys think about this idea, this concept, but
Uh,
what do you think?
I was just thinking how blessed I am to have a wife that is a believer like I am, and to be able to
Mm.
raise kids in a home where we both believe.
Absolutely.
Because I know a lot of friends who there's only one of them, and to hold yourself accountable to a higher power versus whatever the other person is, it's got to be difficult. So that's the first thing came to my mind.
That's a really good one to link.
Mm.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, sorry, got me thinking how much of a battle spiritually that is,
Mm.
the one you're bonded to.
Hmm.
I will just reiterate, and I think even Sean started right off. I think it's both corporate and individual, and I think the words that were picked do again. I'll reiterate, create that blend. It is not meant to be just personal or just corporate, and I think that is. I'm going to go off a little. I had towards the end of being part of a church, they were pushing a narrative. We had to go to 3 sessions, 2 hours each, I think, maybe 3, that talked about individualism versus community, or what's the word? There's another one. I block it out. Groupism or corporatism or communism. I'll be flat out. That's really what it was about. So they present this false choice
Mm.
and use it really because being together and altruistic sounds so good, but then you go, oh, individual, selfish. It was just a way of
Mm.
beating down on the individual and rugged individualism and things like that. And it was referencing Bible verses, and you go look at the verses, they had nothing to do with it. It was a complete false narrative. And I don't think you can resolve selfish versus altruism without God in the equation. Once God's in the equation, everything's resolved. But I spent many years trying to resolve that. And this passage is actually gorgeous in that respect. And this is where the body of Christ is going. We're all parts of the body as well. It fits so well with Ephesians and things. And it is truly both. He's speaking both to us and everyone and others around us, your friends. Even the your in the sentence, your feet
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
be interpreted as the feet of your friends.
Mm.
And those among you. It even uses the word army in there because it has some military aspect.
Mm.
So anyway, my apologies, but you're really hitting targets.
Yeah, I mean, the pronoun your could be singular or plural. So, yeah.
And as an adjective, it's fairly explicit, though.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, but in this case, it was plural, I
Yeah.
must say. But it's ambiguous still. It doesn't really clarify whether it's your personal feet or the feet of you and your friends.
And I think that was on purpose. Yeah.
Amen. And I think that's the beauty of this.
Well, that is good, because that was when I started, as I mentioned, when we were starting off, I mentioned I was really struggling with this passage, and part of it was because of this ambiguity, where I kept going like, are we talking about this? Or are we talking about this? And this is kind of where I resolved to, I think it's talking about both. I think that you're right. And this is
You're
where
right.
I was mentioning that you might be like,
You're right.
what are you talking about, John? This is crazy. But but this is also one of the great things about God's word, which is sometimes you can get into it and you can just read it on the surface and you're just like, okay, let's move on. And then you start looking at it and you're like, I don't know what you're saying, God. You gotta explain it to me. And that's the beauty of it when he does, and he does that. So I love this. I'm stalling a little bit because I just realized that we only have 3 minutes left, and we don't have enough time to hit verse 14, which I expected us to get through. So I'm excited about verse 14, but we'll have to hold that off until next week.
Let
Does
me add-
anybody have? Go
I
ahead, Sean.
have something. John, you brought up about our wives being an accountability partner. In a sense, we are accountable to our wives, but I recommend that you have a guy, a man,
Yeah.
that you're accountable to also. Because there's some things that I won't share with my wife because it's man stuff, you know,
Yeah.
what my thought
Yeah.
life is and those kinds of things. She doesn't need that extra burden upon her as he looking at that girl the wrong way or the right way, you know, and those kinds of things. So I do, you know, yes, we are accountable to our wives, and it's great if they are believers because it does make life a lot easier in making decisions for our kids and for what we're doing. But I'd also recommend that you have someone you can talk to about the man stuff.
Yeah.
So I wanted to add that. I think it's great that we have wonderful wives, and those that don't, we need to be a good witness for them if they aren't believers. But more importantly, it's just having a guy to talk to about some stuff is a lot. It's a lot easier conversation, and they can understand better than what your wife
Yeah.
can understand.
And honestly, it can be tough asking some guy to be able to talk with them, right? That's a hard thing to do, but that's the encouragement we want to come with from today also, which is do that. That it's a good thing. And again, as I mentioned, this is speaking to me as well. It can be hard to ask other people to be involved in your lives, and so we need to do that. All right. Any other thoughts? We are out of time, so we're not moving forward with the next verse. Any thoughts before we close? John has a big giant smile on his face, like he really wants to say something, but he's holding it
I'm
back.
holding it back, man. Dude, I was just thinking, just men when they're talking together, so long as they're sitting next to each other, not staring at each other, they could say anything. It's just like when you're in a car. But when
Yeah.
you're actually looking at each other, that's when it gets a little different. That's all. Nothing special.
Oh, go ahead.
I want to say thank you guys. I didn't, my phone ran out of power in the middle of the night and I woke up and I couldn't even read the time. Got here a few minutes late. I was like,
We're glad you came. All right.
did it, it's like the mind was resisting and just what a blessing to hear you guys speak, I think so eloquently about these brief passages.
So
All good thoughts.
next week I'm going to have mine this way. Okay. So we can talk about anything you want.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. Pardon?
Next week I'm going to have my computer set up like this so that we can talk about anything you want.
So he's going to talk directly to you.
Yeah.
So I'm chimed in, but to make a good habit, you have to do it 21 times in a row.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
Well, I teach that it's 30 to 45 days if you want to do it right. It's like, yeah.
Some of us are slower than others.
Eddie, we can't hear you.
Yeah, still on mute.
Oh, I'm
Oh,
sorry.
There you go.
But yeah. Thank you for this Bible study. I'm a real person. I enjoyed a lot, and hopefully there's some time that I can actually set up my computer, so then I can interact with you more.
Well, we'll love that you
Good
hear,
morning.
Eddie.
You hear me,
Great.
right?
Yes.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Good. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Let's pray. Tim, would you mind praying for us?